Character Options are an interesting company. They've been giving us Doctor Who figures for nearly 20 years now. And whilst their recent outputs have definitely slowed down from the rapid pace of their peak years, and the majority of their content these days are tweaked re-releases of earlier figures, every now and again they can throw you a complete curveball and catch you completely by surprise. And these days, releases from Character Options tend to be like buses. You have nothing for months on end, and then suddenly you get 2 or 3 all in one go. And that's exactly the case here. So hot off the heels of the finally released robot set that hit B&M stores in the last week or two, Character Options announced an online exclusive of an all-new set of characters, and much wanted characters at that. I'm talking of course of the Warriors of the Deep set, featuring for the first time in the 5-inch scale the Silurians. These are one of the key classic monsters that had yet to see life in plastic form at this scale, and we finally have them. When the set was announced, I was understandably very excited, and of course I immediately placed an order. Thankfully these sets have now arrived, and I can now deep dive and give you my review. Now, Warriors of the Deep is certainly a controversial story in fan circles. On the one hand, it has a really tight script, it has a very good plot, and it brings together 2 distinct classic monsters that hadn't been seen on screen before together. On the other hand, the story definitely suffers in terms of some of its production values, most noticeably of course the mecha has received a lot of criticism across the years, and the updated monsters' costumes, most particularly with the Sea Devils of course, is unusual. So I think Character Options' choice to bring us a set dedicated to the Warriors of the Deep is an interesting choice. Now I'm really glad to have more 80s representation in our Doctor Who collections, but I do think it's interesting that this set is 3 Silurians rather than being a mixed set of a Silurian and a Sea Devil, or say a Silurian, a Sea Devil and a companion, or bringing us a brand new variant of the 5th Doctor in, say, his hazmat costume, for example. As it stands, this set costs roughly £30 online, versus the £20 we're used to paying now through the B&M sets. Now, don't get me wrong, I think £30 for 3 figures is still excellent value, and I'm more than happy to put that money down. I do, however, have a slight issue with the fact that we have the same figure here 3 times over, with a very small paint application marking one of them as being slightly different. Now, I don't mind this. At the end of the day, I do like to army build, and I now have 3 Silurians, which is fantastic. And I fully appreciate the counter arguments, which is it's only by being able to pay for these exclusive online sets that they're able to create new molds to bring us new and exclusive characters. So that means they've got to make a certain amount of money in order to be able to justify making these toys. That all makes sense to me. But at the same time, I do feel that this could have just been tweaked with one other character. We'd had a Sea Devil in there, which at the end of the day, the mould already exists. It's just some of the paraphernalia in the costume that needs to change. I think this would have been a much more rounded set, it would have been a much more exciting release, and ultimately better value for money. But with all of that said, let's take a look at the figures themselves. So as ever, starting with the packaging, obviously we've seen this branded packaging several times before. We have obviously the TARDIS in this sort of grey-white, we have the blues, and we have the Doctor Who logo. So it's not the most exciting branding. This, I don't believe, is Character Options' choice really. This is the Doctor Who branding at the moment on pretty much everything. It's just a little bit dull, and it reflects in the packaging, which is a shame, because this is actually quite a big, chunky box this time around. This isn't like the usual slimline B&M sets that we're used to seeing. This is actually quite a big chunky box, and we'll explore why in a moment. But of course we have that wonderful window display there where we can see all 3 of the Silurians there. I do think the positioning of them is quite interesting, especially with that one that's looking away on the right there. I'm not sure what's been said, but he looks pretty upset by it all. If we turn then to the side panel, you can see how wide and how big this packaging is. And of course, on this image again, we have the standard Doctor Who branding there, but we also have an image of the 3 figures themselves. So this looks quite good. You could put this on the shelf quite comfortably and make it fairly presentable. And then on the reverse of the packaging, we have an awful lot of text, which seems to be the new normal from Character Options these days. It's very text heavy. There's a lot of information here. There's information about the story itself. It's got a synopsis there for Warriors of the Deep, has a little bit of bio for the Silurians, and then there's a tiny little section there dedicated to behind the scenes, talking about that 21st season. I tend to think this is quite a novel and interesting approach. It's certainly not the norm, where these days usually what we go for is big images on the reverse of packaging to make it displayable. This clearly isn't something you're going to want to put on display, but it's a completely different approach, which I think is still quite interesting. But I think the standout for me in this packaging, oddly enough, is actually the interior lining. I love what they've done with this inlay. It's absolutely brilliant. It actually is three-dimensional. So we're used to seeing the two-dimensional dioramas that they create for the packaging, which often look very, very nice. But here they've gone the extra mile. So not only have they recreated the interior of a Silurian ship, which looks really nice with the greens and the colour palette they've gone for. It looks pretty authentic. But they actually have that extra cutout where we can see the ships through the display, and I think this looks absolutely fantastic. I think it works really well, and it works as a diorama in its own right. So I think this is something you can take out of the box, put it on your shelf with your figures there, and it's going to look pretty good. So I fully commend Character Options for this. So let's start looking at the figures themselves. Obviously, it is the same figure 3 times over, so I'm only going to look up close at the leader. I think it's fair to say that straight off the bat, this definitely looks the part. It looks pretty authentic, the colouring and the shading, everything about it looks right. I think the head sculpt is particularly well done. This looks really accurate. It's very nicely sculpted. It's all enhanced with a brilliant paint wash over some of those scales there, so it gives it a little bit more texture and makes it a bit more lifelike, and I think they've done a pretty fab job of this. And here we can see that fantastic sculpting on the back of the head. We can see those individual ridges. We can see there's an awful lot of detail gone into this. It looks really nice in the sculpt. And as I said, that complementary wash that's running through it just really enhances that. So there's obviously a darker brown running over this, and it looks great. Meanwhile, on the right hand side, you can see one of the lieutenants. You can see obviously the difference between the rank of these characters. In the first one, obviously the leader has that big red bulb on top of his head, and of course this one has a black bulb. Now, in terms of the torso, the body armour there, obviously this is a lighter piece, as it should be. Again, very nicely sculpted, and it's well painted as well. So there obviously is a white wash running through this to give it a more authentic feel. And we can see on the back, of course, there are those ridges. Now, I'm less impressed with the paint applications here. This looks a little bit more sloppy and not quite as well applied as we've seen on the front and other parts of this figure. The arms are very nicely sculpted. They have that slight scale effect to them. I don't believe we've seen these arms or legs being used before, so I think they're brand new, which is nice. On the left arm, there is a nicely sculpted and well painted wrist strap, which has the 2 green squares on it, which is pretty cool. And this is identical on all 3 figures. The legs and feet look to be brand new, and again, nicely sculpted, well painted. I couldn't really ask for more. Now, in terms of hands, the left hand is an open, cupped hand, whilst on the right hand we have this pointing finger, which I think looks really good, particularly for the leader. Unfortunately, they are recycled for each of the figures, so they all have the exact same hands, which is a little bit distracting. It would have been nice if they could have swapped out the hands for the lieutenants, say. That would have helped subtly differentiate the characters and make them feel a bit more individual. So how does he fare in terms of articulation? Not so great. So sadly, the head can't move from side to side. That's a real shame that we've lost that. To a degree, it makes sense because of the sculpt, and also I don't think they move in the show, so I think we can forgive that on this occasion. It does have ball-jointed shoulders, and of course, they do kick out to the top in that butterfly motion, which is absolutely fantastic, so really happy to see this. I like this a lot. It does have a single-jointed elbow and a swivel at the wrist. Now, there is a swivel at the waist, but again, that moulding of that torso there does present a great deal of motion. So it will turn from the side to side a little bit, but not all the way. He does have hinged hips, so the legs can kick out to the side. They don't obviously look great when you do that, but nevertheless, really pleased to have this functionality. He's also got an upper thigh swivel, which is cool. And of course, the legs do kick forwards, and they kick back a little bit as well, which is good. Now, this is supported with a single joint at the knee, and there is thankfully a swivel at the foot as well, at the ankle there, which is pretty cool. So pleased to see this. And I think it's important to note that the Silurian is slightly taller than your average Doctor Who figure in this scale, which is great. To display this, I've got him standing next to the 4th Doctor. Sadly, my 5th Doctor is in storage, which is a real shame, but we can see him here standing next to Tom Baker, and as you can see, he does stand a little bit taller than Tom, which is good. And here he is standing next to the 7th Doctor, so again, we're seeing some proper sense of scale here. Obviously, he's significantly taller than Sylvester McCoy, and this looks really cool, very, very impressive. And here he is with the Cyber Controller, and these two look to be pretty much evenly matched. They seem to be about roughly the same height. And then finally, here he is next to the giant robot. Obviously, he's significantly smaller than the giant robot, and that's absolutely the way it should be. But hopefully you got a good sense of the scale now. So then, all things considered, I think I'm going to give this a 4-star. This was actually a tricky one for me to rate. I actually went back and forth between star ratings. I kind of considered 3 for a while, and then I pushed it back up to 4. And there's a couple of things working really in this set's favour, and a few things that really detract from it, in my opinion. So, first of all, I think absolutely fantastic in terms of the packaging. I really love that diorama. I think they've gone the extra mile there, and that definitely deserves a distinction for that. I really praise the fact that we've got Silurians at last, and they've done a very, very nice job of the sculpting and the paint apps on these Silurians, so I couldn't really fault them in terms of that. I think that is fantastic. So again, a big pat on the back for Character Options for doing this. On the other hand, there's definitely things that work against this set. I think having them all being pretty much identical, with the exception being the colour of the bulb on top of the heads, isn't really enough. I think it would have been nice if they could have just tweaked little things like the hands, for example, to make them feel more unique. I think also, as I said, it would have been fantastic if we could have had a Sea Devil in there, maybe a Doctor in a new outfit, or another companion. Now, I know these are all big asks, but nevertheless, it does feel like you're paying for the same figure 3 times over when 1 or 2 would do it. But if you are going to do 3 of the same figures in the same pack, then make sure that they do feel distinctly different. And then finally, I think the articulation has definitely taken a hit here. Yes, it's nice that we have those fantastic shoulder joints. It's great that we have the swivel on the ankle. But the fact that, you know, definitely the waist is compromised by that body piece, and of course the head doesn't turn at all. It reminds me very much actually of the Zygon figure that was part of the initial wave of classic figures. This was a really nicely sculpted figure, very nicely painted, but really suffered in the articulation department, and this is a step up from that, but nevertheless it does feel like some of this could have been enhanced. But all in all, a very nice set. If you're a fan, you're going to want this set, and even if you're not a fan of this particular story, but you like Silurians, you're probably going to want it, because at the end of the day, this is the first time we've had Silurians in our collection, and they are a much loved monster. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.